Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other girls in her small Texas town. While they spent their weekends at the mall or talking about boys, she could be found reading military history books or watching documentaries about World War II. Her grandfather's old photo in his Navy uniform sat on her nightstand, and she would often trace the medals on his chest with her finger, wondering what stories they held. When Sarah turned 18, she made a decision that shocked everyone in Millfield. Against her parents' wishes and the confused stares of her classmates, she walked into the only tattoo parlor in town and asked for something very specific. The tattoo artist, a burly man named Rick who had seen every design imaginable, raised his eyebrows when Sarah showed him the faded photograph. "You sure about this, kid?" Rick asked, studying the image of military insignia and numbers. "This ain't exactly what most girls your age come in asking for." Sarah nodded firmly. "I'm sure. It needs to be exactly like this. Every detail matters." The tattoo took 3 hours to complete. When it was finished, Sarah had a detailed military insignia on her shoulder blade, complete with specific numbers and symbols that meant nothing to most people who saw it. The design looked official and important, but to the residents of Millfield, it was just another young person's questionable decision. Her mother cried when she saw it. Her father shook his head and muttered about kids these days. Her friends giggled and asked if she was trying to look tough. Sarah's English teacher, Mrs. Henderson, pulled her aside after class and suggested she think about covering it up for job interviews in the future. "Employers don't like to see tattoos, especially ones that look so military," Mrs. Henderson said with concern. "It might give people the wrong impression about you." Sarah smiled politely but didn't explain. She couldn't explain. The tattoo wasn't about looking tough or making a statement. It was about honoring something that had been hidden for over 60 years. After high school, Sarah moved to Dallas for college. She studied history and education, planning to become a teacher like Mrs. Henderson, though hopefully with a more open mind. The tattoo remained her secret, hidden under professional clothing and conservative blouses. Occasionally, a boyfriend would ask about it, but Sarah would deflect the question or change the subject. Years passed, and Sarah built a quiet life for herself. She taught middle school history, lived in a small apartment with her rescue dog, and visited her aging grandmother every weekend. Her grandmother, Rosa, was 92 and lived in a nursing home after a fall had made it impossible for her to care for herself. Rosa had always been a mystery to the family. She spoke little about her past, claiming her memory wasn't what it used to be. She had come to America from Mexico in the early 1950s, married Sarah's grandfather quickly, and rarely spoke about her life before then. The family assumed she was just a simple woman who had been lucky to marry a war hero. During one of Sarah's visits, she noticed her grandmother looking unusually agitated. Rosa kept clutching an old wooden box and muttering in Spanish. When Sarah asked what was wrong, Rosa looked at her with surprisingly clear eyes. "Mija, I need to tell you something," Rosa said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Something I should have told the family years ago." Sarah sat down beside her grandmother's bed, intrigued. Rosa rarely spoke about the past, and when she did, it was usually confused fragments about cooking or church. "What is it, abuela?" Rosa opened the wooden box with shaking hands. Inside were documents, photographs, and what looked like official papers. Sarah couldn't read the Spanish text, but she could see official seals and signatures. "I wasn't just a simple girl from Mexico," Rosa began, her voice trembling. "During the war, I worked with the American forces. I helped hide pilots who were shot down. I carried messages. I saved lives." Sarah's heart began racing. She looked more closely at the photographs and saw her young grandmother in what appeared to be military contexts, surrounded by uniformed men who were clearly American soldiers. "The tattoo you got," Rosa continued, somehow knowing about the design her granddaughter had kept hidden. "I saw it when you were changing your shirt last month. Where did you get that design?" Sarah was stunned. "How do you know about my tattoo?" Rosa pulled out a faded piece of paper from the box. On it was drawn the exact same insignia that Sarah had tattooed on her shoulder blade, complete with the same numbers and symbols. "This was my unit designation," Rosa whispered. "I was part of a secret resistance network. The Americans gave me this to identify myself if I was ever captured or needed help. Only a few people knew what these symbols meant." Sarah felt the room spinning. "But where did I get this design?" Rosa smiled sadly. "From your grandfather's things. He kept everything in a box in the attic. After he died, you spent hours going through his belongings. You found my old papers mixed in with his military documents. You were only 10, but you asked me about this symbol. I told you it was nothing important, just old papers." Sarah remembered that day vividly. She had been fascinated by all the military memorabilia, but one particular document had caught her attention. She had drawn the insignia in her diary, not understanding what it meant but feeling somehow connected to it. Years later, when she decided to get a tattoo, she had found that old diary entry and known immediately what she wanted. "You got the tattoo to honor what you thought was Grandpa's service," Rosa continued. "But you were really honoring mine. And I was too much of a coward to tell you." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. "Why didn't you ever tell us? Why keep it secret?" Rosa's face darkened. "Because when I came to America, being Mexican was hard enough. Being a Mexican woman who had fought in the war. People didn't want to hear those stories. They wanted simple stories about simple immigrants who were grateful for the opportunity to be here. They didn't want to know about the sacrifices we made or the risks we took." Rosa pulled out more photographs, showing her with groups of American pilots and resistance fighters. In one image, she was clearly being presented with some kind of medal or commendation. "I received recognition from the American military," Rosa said proudly. "But I was told to keep it quiet. National security, they said. The networks we built had to stay secret to protect the people still fighting." Sarah looked at her grandmother with new eyes. This frail woman in a nursing home bed had been a war hero, and no one had known. "There's something else," Rosa said, pulling out a final document. "Every year, there's a ceremony in Washington, D.C. They honor the foreign nationals who helped American forces during the war. I was supposed to go, but I never did. I was too afraid, too ashamed of my English, too worried that people would think I was making it up." Sarah studied the document. It was an official invitation from the Department of Defense, asking Rosa to attend a recognition ceremony for foreign nationals who provided extraordinary service to American forces during World War II. The invitation was dated for the following month. "Abuela, you have to go to this ceremony," Sarah said firmly. Rosa shook her head. "I'm too old, too sick. Besides, who would believe an old Mexican woman in a wheelchair?" Sarah stood up, her mind racing with possibilities. "What if I went with you? What if we went together?" Rosa looked at her granddaughter with surprise. "Why would you want to do that?" Sarah pulled her shirt slightly off her shoulder, revealing the edge of her tattoo. "Because I've been carrying your story on my skin for 5 years without knowing it. Because you deserve recognition for what you did. And because it's time people knew the truth about who you really are." Rosa stared at the tattoo, then at her granddaughter's determined face. For the first time in years, she smiled with genuine happiness. "You would really come with me? Help me tell my story?" Sarah nodded. "We're going to Washington, Abuela. And everyone is going to know exactly who you are and what you did." As Sarah helped her grandmother put the documents back in the wooden box, she felt a strange sense of destiny. The tattoo that everyone had dismissed as meaningless was about to reveal its true significance. And Rosa Martinez, the quiet woman everyone thought was just a simple immigrant, was about to step into the recognition she had been denied for over 70 years. 3 weeks later, Sarah pushed her grandmother's wheelchair through the halls of the Pentagon. Rosa had insisted on wearing her best dress, a navy blue outfit she had saved for special occasions, and Sarah had chosen a sleeveless blouse that would allow her tattoo to be visible if needed. Both women were nervous, but Rosa seemed to grow stronger with each step toward their destination. The ceremony was being held in a large conference room filled with military officers, government officials, and other elderly veterans. Sarah noticed that most of the honorees were men in their 90s, wearing crisp uniforms decorated with medals. Rosa, in her simple dress and wheelchair, looked small and out of place. A young military aide approached them with a clipboard. "Name?" he asked efficiently. "Rosa Martinez," Sarah replied when her grandmother seemed too nervous to speak. The aide scanned his list, frowning. "I don't see that name here. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Sarah felt her heart sink. She has the invitation. She's being honored for her service during World War II. The aide looked skeptical. "Ma'am, this ceremony is for foreign nationals who provided direct military support to American forces. Are you sure your grandmother qualifies?" Before Sarah could respond, Rosa spoke up in a voice stronger than Sarah had heard in months. "I hid American pilots in my family's barn. I carried coded messages between resistance cells. I guided downed airmen through mountain passes to safety. I have the documentation to prove it." The aide's expression didn't change. "Well, if your name isn't on the list. What seems to be the problem here?" A deep voice interrupted them. Sarah turned to see a tall man in an army uniform approaching. His chest was covered with ribbons and medals, and he carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Sir, these ladies claim to be invited to the ceremony, but the name isn't on my list," the aide explained. The officer, whose nameplate read, Commander Peterson, looked at Rosa with interest. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Rosa Martinez," Rosa replied, lifting her chin with pride. "I served with the 42nd Resistance Network in northern Mexico, 1943 to 1945. Commander Peterson's eyes widened. "The 42nd Network? Ma'am, that was one of the most effective resistance operations in the entire theater. You served with them?" Rosa nodded. "I was communications specialist and safe house coordinator." The commander turned to the aide sharply. "Check that list again. And if her name isn't there, find out why. The 42nd Network saved dozens of American lives." While the aide hurried away with his clipboard, Commander Peterson knelt beside Rosa's wheelchair. "Ma'am, it would be an honor to hear about your service. The 42nd Network's operations are still studied in our military academies." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "You know about our work?" "Know about it? Ma'am, my grandfather was Lieutenant James Peterson, 8th Air Force. He was shot down over northern Mexico in 1944. The 42nd Network saved his life and got him back to his unit. If it wasn't for people like you, I wouldn't exist." Sarah watched in amazement as her grandmother transformed before her eyes. The frail, confused woman from the nursing home was gone, replaced by someone confident and proud. "James Peterson," Rosa repeated thoughtfully. "Tall boy, red hair, spoke terrible Spanish." Commander Peterson laughed. "That sounds like Grandpa. I remember him. We hid him for 6 weeks while his leg healed. He taught me some English words, and I taught him how to make tortillas. He was a good boy." The commander's eyes were bright with emotion. "He talked about all of you until the day he died. He said the Mexican resistance fighters were the bravest people he ever met." The aide returned, looking embarrassed. "Sir, there was an administrative error. Mrs. Martinez's name was on the original list, but it got dropped during a computer transfer. She's absolutely supposed to be here." Commander Peterson helped escort Rosa and Sarah to the front of the room, where seats had been reserved for the honorees. As they made their way through the crowd, Sarah noticed other military personnel taking notice of Rosa. Word seemed to be spreading about who she was. The ceremony began with speeches from various officials, but Sarah could tell Rosa was getting tired. The excitement and emotion of the day were taking their toll. Just as Sarah was wondering if they should leave early, Commander Peterson approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a moment to recognize someone special who's with us today. Mrs. Rosa Martinez served with the 42nd Resistance Network, one of the most effective covert operations of the war. Her work directly saved the lives of dozens of American servicemen." The audience began to applaud, and Sarah saw Rosa sit up straighter in her wheelchair. "But there's something else I'd like to share," Commander Peterson continued. "Mrs. Martinez's granddaughter is here with us today, and she's carrying something remarkable." Sarah felt confused as Commander Peterson looked directly at her. "Miss Martinez, would you mind standing and showing everyone your tattoo?" Sarah's heart began racing. How did he know about the tattoo? She looked at Rosa, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, Sarah stood and pulled her blouse aside to reveal the military insignia on her shoulder blade. A murmur went through the crowd. Commander Peterson continued speaking. "That tattoo shows the unit designation for the 42nd Resistance Network. But here's what makes this truly extraordinary. Miss Martinez got that tattoo 5 years ago, long before she knew about her grandmother's service. She chose to honor what she thought was her grandfather's military career, not knowing she was actually honoring her grandmother's secret war record." The room fell silent. Commander Peterson's voice grew emotional. "Sometimes, the bonds that connect us to our family's legacy run deeper than conscious memory. Sometimes, we carry our ancestors' stories in ways we don't even understand until the time is right." Commander Peterson stepped down from the podium and walked directly to Rosa's wheelchair. To everyone's surprise, including Sarah's, he came to attention and gave Rosa a crisp military salute. "Ma'am, on behalf of the United States military and all the families whose loved ones you saved, thank you for your service." As he held the salute, tears began streaming down Commander Peterson's face. The emotion was contagious, and Sarah saw other officers throughout the room wiping their eyes. Rosa, despite her frailty, managed to sit up straight and return the salute with surprising steadiness. "It was my honor to serve," she said clearly. The entire room erupted in applause. Sarah watched in amazement as person after person approached Rosa, shaking her hand, thanking her, sharing stories of family members who had been saved by resistance networks like hers. One elderly man in a Navy uniform introduced himself as Captain Williams. "My father was rescued by your network in 1944, he told Rosa. "He used to say that the Mexican resistance fighters were fearless. He was right." A woman in an Air Force uniform explained that she had written her master's thesis on covert operations during World War II. "Your network's success rate was incredible," she told Rosa. "You should know that your work is still taught in our intelligence schools." As the afternoon wore on, Sarah realized that her grandmother had become the center of attention at the entire ceremony. People were lined up to meet her, to thank her, to hear her stories. Rosa, energized by the recognition, shared tale after tale of daring rescues and close calls. "We had a system," Rosa explained to a group of fascinated officers. "The pilots would be passed from house to house, never staying in one place more than a few nights. Each family only knew their part of the route, so if someone was captured, they couldn't compromise the whole network. When it was time to leave, Commander Peterson personally escorted them to the exit. "Mrs. Martinez," he said, "I hope you know that your service has never been forgotten, even if it was classified. There are families all over America who exist because of what you did." Rosa nodded, but then looked at Sarah. "I think the real hero here is my granddaughter. She carried my story for 5 years without knowing it. She brought me here when I was too afraid to come myself." Commander Peterson looked at Sarah's tattoo again, shaking his head in amazement. "In all my years of service, I've never seen anything like this. You were connected to your grandmother's legacy in a way that defies explanation." As they drove home, Rosa was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "Mija, I'm sorry I never told you the truth sooner." Sarah reached over and took her grandmother's hand. "You told me when the time was right. And now everyone knows who you really are. Rosa smiled. That tattoo of yours isn't meaningless anymore, is it? Sarah laughed. It never was meaningless. I just didn't understand what it meant yet. 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of her middle school history class, showing them the photographs from the Pentagon ceremony. On the board behind her was an enlarged image of her tattoo alongside pictures of Rosa in her wartime uniform. Sometimes, Sarah told her students, the most important stories are the ones that haven't been told yet. Sometimes, people we think we know completely are carrying incredible secrets. And sometimes, we honor our ancestors in ways we don't even understand until years later. One student raised her hand. Ms. Martinez, what happened to your grandmother after the ceremony? Sarah smiled. She lived for 6 more months after that day. But they were different months. She started telling everyone her story. She recorded interviews for the local historical society. She finally felt proud of who she was and what she had done. Another student asked, "Do you think it's weird that you got a tattoo about something you didn't know about?" Sarah touched her shoulder where the tattoo lay hidden under her professional blouse. "I think some connections run deeper than we understand. I think our family's stories live inside us, even when we don't know the whole truth." As the class ended and students filed out, Sarah thought about Rosa, who had passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 months earlier. The nursing home had held a memorial service, and over 50 people had attended, military personnel, local historians, and family members who finally knew Rosa's full story. The tattoo on Sarah's shoulder would always be there, no longer a meaningless design, but a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds between generations. And every time someone asked about it, Sarah would tell them about her grandmother, the war hero who had been hiding in plain sight for 70 years, waiting for someone to help her step into the light.